Welcome to the Airiam Podcast. This podcast covers topics related to cyber and human resilience. The content's geared towards owners and CEOs of small and medium-sized companies, as well as IT and cybersecurity leaders. My name is Art Ocain. I lead cybersecurity and incident response at Airiam. Today, we're talking about cyber resilience and discussing the lessons learned from the CrowdStrike vulnerability. Not really a vulnerability, more just a self-inflicted incident in July where self-inflicted issues impacted recovery time, and really kind of how we can expect that kind of behavior with other software providers, and really what we should be doing and thinking about in our own organizations. Joining me today is Shane Steiger from MITRE. How are you doing, Shane?
I'm doing all right. Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on again. I know we've had you on before, so one of the questions I usually ask is, what do you do to start your day? What's your routine like?
Well, it's usually waking up, getting my daughter ready now for kindergarten. So that's a lesson in resilience in and of itself. But once I get to the technology side of things, it's generally, hey, what's going on in the world? What's going on at least in the day, and then what's going on with projects and so forth. So kind of go broadly, see some feeds, make sure I understand what's up, make sure the world's still spinning, and then kind of bring it in more narrowly into a microcosm. That's basically the way I start my day. Then obviously it's to tackle the emails, tackle the fire of the day, so to speak.
I'd imagine where you are at MITRE, you probably have access to different feeds than I do. But as far as commercially available stuff, what do you think are great data sources for you to catch up with?
Generally, I look to see what planes are in the air. So I'm kind of I'll look at ADSB feeds and so forth, and obviously what's going on in the cyber world, from dark reading, etc., Hacker News, and all of that. But I mean, generally it's the usual fare of probably some of the cyber folks, plus a little bit of that macrocosm of what things are going on more broadly, because it all has dependency. It all has impact.
Absolutely. Speaking of impact and dependencies, when the CrowdStrike outage happened, a great company, nobody can deny that, great technology, great software, and it's very widely installed. And there's other stuff that we have widely installed, as far as software that's in almost every enterprise in the world and could easily affect us the same way. When that happened, it was very impactful for almost everybody. What were the first signs, or what are the things that you saw first when it happened? How did you hear about it happening?
Well, I was actually traveling internationally that morning for a ransomware workshop. So that workshop was meant to emphasize the need for cyber resiliency in planning for the unplanned. And when the CrowdStrike event occurred, we had to worry whether the many participants who were also traveling internationally were able to even going to be there, including all the folks that were actually running the event. So what was interesting is the impact was direct, and very direct, on an unplanned event. For what we were trying to go and talk out, work out in a workshop. So it provided somewhat that lesson space, so to speak, because it was a topic of conversation once folks did get there. Luckily, we were not impacted. By only one set of folks had any kind of real issue. Part of it was just the airports they were flying through. But as a result, this incident, while disruptive, offers a wealth of teachable moments in terms of cyber resiliency. and we can take those back and hopefully apply those for things going forward.
There was a specific airline that was heavily impacted, and they weren't very quick at getting operations back up and running. They were down 4 days, and it at least approaching, if not exceeding, a week, with passengers impacted and just not able to provide service at all. And of course, when you listen to really kind of what they were going through at the time, and they were basically kind of passing blame and saying, that this is because of this. Uh, what thoughts are kind of like the first things you think of as far as planning to how could a organization like that avoid such an impact? Or like how should they start thinking about planning around that kind of impact to avoid it?
Well, I mean, one of the big challenges is that cyber resiliency is not just solely about countering an ever-present, ever-adapting adversary. Sometimes, things are self-inflicted. In this case, that was definitely the case, as a self-inflicted event. Uh, One of the big things in terms of planning for the unplanned, is taking those lessons from those self-inflicted events and carrying them forward, and possibly even generating events, maybe, not, definitely not at this size, impact, scale, but within your own organization, having certain time periods where you can go and disrupt your organization by unplugging something. If I unplug this, what happens? That's not something you necessarily want to go and engage, but that's what happens. I remember even in a manufacturing environment that I used to support, folks plugged a router into itself and created a routing loop, and there were a couple of things that weren't enabled on that switch, and therefore it created an event and took the entire site down for manufacturing for a period of time. So knowing what the dependencies are in those scenarios when unplanned events happen, or a planned disruption of potential known impact, that's when when those assets become unavailable, it underscores that need to learn, okay, how can I prevent this from happening in the future? How can I create a dependency map so I understand all the things and impacts that I've now disrupted, and then improve your recovery process. So in that sense, this is definitely one of those areas that's good fodder for building out those plans.
Absolutely. And I think every organization probably learned something different. How can we effectively put hands on every machine remotely? How can we, get in through an offline system and affect everything, through some kind of, out of band management system, whether it's like Intel NIC, management or whatever. How can we affect all these machines? How can we, if we can't do it remotely, how do we get hands on every machine and get some support staff on every machine and things like that? So there's a lot of tactical things that organizations learned, which may have been seemed specific to the event, but it really is the same challenges you're going to have if you have ransomware, the same challenges that you're going to have if you fight a destructive adversary, using wiper, etc. It's the same challenges you're going to have if there's a bad OS build that gets pushed out and all of a sudden Windows won't boot across your enterprise, things like that. So it's really, it may seem like it was specific, but it really should affect the playbooks and plans of all these organizations and become a part of their adaptation, after they recover here, to uh, get ready for the next iteration of mishaps that may happen. So I think that introducing, well, not number one, recording all this stuff and actually using it, and doing like a really good hot wash and after action, lessons learned to put together what do you learn and what do you want to retain in the organization from this? What do you want to change policy around? What do you want to change your mechanisms and response behaviors around? Like, what do you want to build playbooks around? What needs to be captured out of this is a key thing. But also, one thing that I think about, and you mentioned with the patch cable creating that loop, is chaos. Netflix has that Chaos Monkey package that basically breaks things, randomly attacks things, takes them down, breaks things in their environment on purpose in order to test their resiliency and basically to build resiliency into their system. And the fact that we are so fragile, most enterprises are very fragile. Somebody can plug a patch cable in wrong and take down the whole network or the whole global enterprise. Is a reality. And so thinking about the amount of chaos that, one vendor, mishap can create, it just shows that we need to do more kind of resiliency testing around that and introduce chaos into our environments as a resiliency test. I always view patching as a resiliency test, like,
Mm-hmm.
because if you patch your machines and one doesn't come up, like that's just, you need to have planning and a mechanism around recovery. And the first couple times it's going to be awful, and then you're going to come up with a good way to do it so you can bounce back. That you have to learn from mistakes and learn from what's being handed to you. And that's really what I'm feeling the whole theme of this is. What are your
Yeah, I think
thoughts?
Yeah, and I think there's even more that, for those folks that might not be down that path that far,
Mm,
might have just experienced the CrowdStrike event. And if they're asked, do you have an incident response plan of any sort or a dependency map within your environment of resources? And the answers are no. If that's the answer, then this is your opportunity. This is the time to
mm,
go and even just mine your emails. Go
mm,
back and search for key terms from this date, or this time period where that the event started through to the event was considered over. Finding all those emails, those texts, those Teams messages, those correspondences, throwing them into a document, and then starting to outline what a plan would look like for a CrowdStrike like event. At least then you have some form of plan, and you can start to adapt that over to an actual incident response plan, or a plan where you talk about the patching as a resiliency test. There's also the concept that, hey, the adversary can do much worse to you.
mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so as a result, having at least a minimal plan put together based on this event, don't waste it,
Mm-hmm.
and bring together at least the outlines of something so that you have a process and you understand some of your dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that you said, which I think that we have to be careful of, is that the event itself, although yes, it affected a particular, it affected CrowdStrike, and folks, there was definitely noise right after the event.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I do fear is that folks will start to pull away from some of the protections they have from tools like
Mm-hmm.
CrowdStrike
Mm-hmm.
as a result of their hooks into the operating system. Many software packages have those
Mm-hmm.
hooks, but my fear is if they start to pull away from those tool sets, the adversary can play up
Yeah.
on that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that
Oh
FUD.
yeah.
And as a result, start to bring down some of the capability sets that a defender would have, and those capability sets being rapid and rapid detection and response.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, I think that the one thing that also should be kept in mind is that although yes, this particular event happened, it's still one that has an effect on a subset of things. There's many other things that
Mm-hmm.
have those same hooks,
Yep.
including the Microsoft itself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as a result, just keep that in mind, weigh and balance for your risk appetite, but don't head for the doors just yet, because those capabilities still will need to be in play, even through any kind of gap for a solution that might not be as invasive to the OS. But there's, that's a challenge that should be kept in mind.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know when that happened, a lot of people were already reaching out to vendors to try to move solutions. And
Hmm.
yeah, keep in mind that threat actors love to see you backing out CrowdStrike. It's they're a market leader for a reason, and not to say there aren't other solutions out there. I don't want to run through brand awareness on everybody, but it's it, there are a lot of great EDR platforms, a lot of good security platforms out there, and they all have kind of a similar setup. This could happen to anyone, and
Hmm.
so uh, you know doing the grass is greener thing and just moving to another vendor right now because of what happened, uh, you know, that could just as easily happen to them next month. So it's not really the solution. The solution is to get your organization ready so that when an incident does happen through a vendor, through a supply chain item, when something is impacting all your machines, you have a way to bounce back. You have a way to touch everything, you have a way to get critical systems online. You understand what your critical systems are, what those assets are, and what are the logistics to get in front of them, to manage them if you need to. Do you have a response capability? But yeah, definitely don't back out your security tools regardless of the vendor, unless you have a plan to rapidly replace them immediately, because leaving yourself wide open right now, this is not the internet environment to start doing that and leaving yourself kind of cyber naked at the moment. We don't want to do that.
Right. And there's one other thing that you also have to keep in mind, especially in this environment. So we talk about the environment and how crazy it is right now. But there's an interesting point to be had, is that, hey, this tool set had these hooks. The OS, Microsoft has the hooks. Other tool sets have the hooks to be able to rapidly do something. If the world is upside down for some reason, by an intentional action by an adversary, and we need to react very rapidly to a set of events. At least we've shown that yes, we can. The adversary can, if this is reconnoitered, but at the more broadly, we can too. I always see this as a kind of a nodal race, a race to manage endpoints. And so as a result, as long as we can manage them securely, manage them better, and manage them faster, that's of an advantage, especially if the world's upside down and we need to take out certain segments of a larger set of network environments, or we need to rapidly deploy something in order to prevent that from happening. Um, you know, uh, I think some of the recent events from WannaCry, NotPetya, and so forth also showed even just the ability to delete out a file per c.dat. That was something that was useful. And in this case, it's obviously remotely touching and being able to hook into a set of environments. But keep that in mind, that in some situations or scenarios, that is something that you need to um, understand as a possible need or capability. In the past, when I was dealing with down configure and down add up years and years ago, we sacrificed a certain set of machines on the environment. Once they locked out accounts, we just turned their network cards off as a next step. That was the response within SEP. So, there's value in being able to do some of that, and to protect the larger environment whatever that your mission or business need is.
Yeah, yeah. And I definitely want you to dig into some more about cyber resiliency also, but before we do that, I know that there's metrics really around this. Like, usually when I think about, recovery, you're thinking about RPO, RTO, things like that in a disaster recovery, restore time objective, restore point objective. When you're talking about cyber resiliency, what are kind of the key metrics, or what is the key metric that you're usually thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, key metrics are really to bring yourself to minimum business or mission functionality initially. So if you're impacted below that, there's minimum business or mission functionality, and then there's normal mission or business functionality. And there's always, some kind of ebb and flow if you envision this on a chart. And there's a set of systems book of knowledge, CBOK type charts that have been referred to even from our own cyber resiliency engineering framework, or 800 160 volume 2, where that normal functionality ebbs and flows. It's when it goes below that normal line to impactful, where you're still maybe able to operate, but you're operating in a degraded state. And therefore, the things that you'll want to keep in mind are bringing yourself back up to minimum business and mission functionality. What time does that take? And then what time does it take for you to take yourselves back to, normal business or mission functionality? Those elements, they're measurable. In this case, the CrowdStrike event, if the exact same event happened again, everybody should be striving to beat the amount of time it took for them to recover. So, and that would be looking back to what they've built as a potential playbook from the CrowdStrike event. That would be to bring themselves back to a minimum, time to recover, so to speak, across a CrowdStrike-like event. So you should be. I know each of us have experienced it in different ways. So that's why the dependency analysis is key. But you should be able to say, hey, it took us 2 weeks to completely recover back to normal, but it actually took us, say, 1.5, 2 days to get to minimum business functionality. That means that you should be able to at least try and beat those times, especially if you're trying to plan an event. Plan a test of your incident response. Plan a test of what you've kind of created as your own event, in order to understand what kind of impact and how much measure of time it takes to get back to those kind of two areas of minimum and normal functionality.
Yeah. And when you're using that kind of when you're baselining against yourself, a lot of times we talk about that baseline, or that expectation, as that is MTTR, a mean time to recovery. And I know in the SOC world, a lot of times that's a different word. That's mean time to response or something like that. But usually in a DR situation or resilience, we're talking about mean time to recovery. And it sounds like, really, if you're doing it right, you should be, if I'm hearing you right, there should be a MTTR for critical systems, and then for really the rest of business operations in order to restore to normal, so that you can set kind of two sets of expectations. And that's a good way of thinking of it, because usually when I'm IR and DR planning, we have a prioritized list of systems, and I'm setting expectations around each system, or each batch of systems. Like, here are your financial systems, we'll get up in 48 hours, Active Directory in 8 hours, and where your web application servers, it might take a week to get back up and running and redeploy code and everything. So but just setting different expectations for different systems is a key thing. Too many times we're kind of like almost trying to distill it into one number, and I think it's really valuable to the business. What you said is really that mean time to recovery for critical systems in order to be able to perform business is really the number that matters. Sometimes it can take months to get you back to normal, but that's okay. Companies making
Yeah.
money, you know.
One thing that's kind of interesting is we actually had a site that before I even joined MITRE, but I was helping with some of the input to this site. It was if you go out and Google MITRE's industry perspective on cyber resiliency. This site was stood up in 2015, and it's based on the cyber resiliency engineering framework. So NIST 800 160 Volume 2's content. And we actually had an opportunity to resurrect certain elements of the site. And we'll be including more of that as links to the CREF Navigator and upcoming updates to the CREF Navigator. But what's kind of hidden within that site are architectural and executive guidance for, hey, how do I recover from destructive malware? Similar type set of scenarios. And one of the big takeaways from it is somewhat that core services recovery element and creating expectations around that. Whereas that's still not enough. You still obviously want to get to normal or business functionality. And then lastly, obviously adapt so this doesn't happen again, or you're adapting to what's you have anticipated what could happen to you in the future, true adaptation. And so I think that there's some definitely interesting lessons, even from this event, ones we should internalize, but ones that have been gathered from even industry perspective and have been put out there and been out there for a little while, but are gonna, kind of live again in new form probably in the future, but nonetheless are very informative because those lessons are the same. It's the same narrative. It's just somewhat a different set of facts and players.
Absolutely. And that's great that that's been around, that site, and that discussion has really been around this long. It's, almost 10 years old now. And, it's really kind of
And
the
it's
same.
still informative.
Yeah.
It still provides the kind of the hey, if you get this foundational element, you've gotten yourself at least part of the way there to understand what's needed going forward, what you need to architect to protect and prevent against.
So when I'm thinking about architecture, a lot of times I look at CrowdStrike Navigator because, it kind of is, to me, it's, I'm not using it really tactically. I'm kind of looking at it for inspiration. It's like I'm saying, okay, if I'm dealing with this kind of situation, these are the things I need to think about. So that's been super useful for me. But when we're talking about events like this, like similar to the CrowdStrike situation, obviously there are elements of cyber resiliency that come into play when we're thinking about that. And so I'd encourage everybody to take a look at CREF Navigator and, explore it, even if you're not using it on a day-to-day basis. It may help inform your cyber or IT strategy or your business continuity strategy for your organization. Shane, I know that you guys have been making tons of changes and you've been integrating systems and you've been doing a lot of things with CrowdStrike Navigator to make it even more of a, superpower for people in their planning process and their design process. Can you kind of tell the world kind of, where CrowdStrike Navigator is right now?
Yeah, so we've added in so the pieces that are there from the attack relationships back to mitigations, candidate mitigations, mitigations within TAC, candidate mitigations within 800 160 Volume 2. Those have been really those key drivers because folks can go and choose their own adventure for which types of techniques that they're concerned about, attack techniques that are that keep them up at night, their particular JSON export from the attack navigator can be imported directly into the Greph navigator, and they can get that story back as to which candidate mitigations or mitigations they need to keep in mind and put that into cyber resiliency language of approaches and techniques. But we've also added in some elements for CMMC. And so CMMC 2.0 and the relationships back to the attack techniques. So that actually has proven to be another space for folks to go and engage the Cref Navigator in such a way that they can see it in terms of 853, RMF controls, as well as to be able to pull themselves into the story of, oh, these are the attack techniques I'm concerned about. So it's the ability to talk from attack over to the 853 controls all the way, to the CMMC 2.0 elements. So those are some of the things that are in there now, and things that are in the works. We'll soon have for every technique an animated GIFs, because some folks say, "Hey, I don't understand, dynamic positioning as a technique. Can you explain it a little bit to me?" The definitions are there on the site, but sometimes you need a picture. So we've made some animated GIFs across to all 14 techniques that will get published soon. And also we have some elements that are in the background for the with ZTA, so for zero trust architecture elements from that's been published out from DoD CIO and possibly other profiles as well. But those will be not only at, say, an interactive choose your own adventure type setup for pillars, capabilities, and activities, but also mappings back to attack,
That's
which is a
impressive.
big deal.
Yeah, the attack stuff, I've been using for a while, but CMMC, it'd be interesting to see really how they interplay, because, I think of CMMC, I think of it as, really compliance model,
Mm-hmm.
and not really structured around resilience, but it'll be interesting to see kind of how they touch each other there in
Well,
that model. Yeah.
compliance model, they touch each other right at the 853
Hmm.
layer. And, keeping in mind that 853 and 800 160 volume 2 is the same, many of the same authors.
Hmm.
Um, that compliance level has those mappings already back to the attack framework. So you get from the compliance model to the controls within 853 Rev 5, and there's mappings already back over to
Hmm.
the attack techniques. So the relationships are there, and that's how that works.
Awesome. And dealing with zero trust, I've done work on zero trust working groups and stuff like that. So, from my first, indoctrination into zero trust, when I discovered Cref and Cref Navigator, I was like, wow, there's a lot of overlap in things here, and that really we should be able to navigate zero trust strategy the same way we navigate resilience strategy with Cref. And so, I'm glad to see that they're kind of weaving together now, because if I'm trying to address a specific pillar or a strategy that touches a couple pillars with, zero trust strategy, and trying to figure out really how that applies to my resiliency strategy, it'd be interesting to see. So I'm glad that you guys are tying that together. Now,
Yeah,
I know that
there's
you guys
one
are pretty,
piece
oh,
there's
go
one
on.
piece to that though that's really key, and I just need to throw it out there before I
Hmm.
forget, is just like the current Cref Navigator has the ability to export out to JSON or export out to CSV for you to do your analysis, or to assign tasks to somebody. This person has this particular set of tasks based on this technique within, say, Cref. But we got the same thing for the zero trust efforts, so that you'll have the ability to export, say, a particular pillar, a particular, potentially a particular uh, capability or activity. And so as a result, that's key. And that's actually that kind of interaction or interactive ability really kind of creates a nice shortcut for folks who, unfortunately, cyber still does live in Excel a little bit. But our goal is, of course, to get it out of there.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else that you want to add about MITRE or CREF Navigator?
No, I think just watch, stay tuned. Things coming up very soon, and I'm hoping that the community will like it.
Yeah, I think that it's always a surprise. Everything's hush hush with you guys until some cool new feature or something gets released, and so it's always interesting to see what's coming down the pipe. Yeah, so thank you so much for your time today. This was a great discussion. For everybody listening, please subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. New episodes are typically released every other Wednesday. For more information on Airiam, visit www.airiam.com.